My name is Teresa Warner, and this year I have the honor of serving as president of the National Press Club. It's my great pleasure to welcome you here tonight for our annual Fourth Estate Award Dinner. The National Press Club is the world's leading professional organization for journalists, and tonight is one of the club's greatest nights. Each year, the club honors an outstanding journalist with its highest honor, the Fourth Estate Award. No journalist in the world deserves this award more than the man seated here to my left, Bob Woodward of the Washington Post. Perhaps Bob Schieffer of CBS News, our 2010 Fourth Estate Award winner, described Bob better than anyone. Woodward has established himself as the best reporter of our time, Schieffer once said. He may be the best reporter of all time. So it's a big challenge we have here tonight, honoring and toasting the best of the best. But I think we're well prepared to do just that, thanks to some of the people joining me here at the head table. And I would like to introduce our head table guests, starting from my left and from your right. David Marinis, a Pulitzer Prize-winning associate editor at the Washington Post. George Solomon, a former sports editor at the Post and director of the Shirley Povich Center for Sports Journalism at the University of Maryland. Donna Leinwan Leger of USA Today, a past National Press Club president and the vice chair of the committee that put together tonight's dinner. Our guest of honor, Bob Woodward. On the other side of the podium, we have Don Graham, CEO and chairman of the Washington Post Company. Next, we have Catherine Weymouth, the publisher of the Washington Post, and Rick Dunham of Hearst Newspapers and president of the National Press Club Journalism Institute. Thank you all very much for joining us here this evening. We are also honored tonight to be joined by past winners of our Fourth Estate Award, including Austin Kiplinger, editor emeritus of the Kiplinger Organization. Austin, please stand. And legendary civil rights reporter Simeon Booker. I'm also pleased to welcome several other important guests. First off, we have several former presidents of the National Press Club and the Washington Press Club. Would all of you please stand for a moment? Thank you. And actually, I'd like to single out one of those past presidents for a special mention. 39 years ago, our president at the time, Don Larrabee. Don, would you please stand for a second? He conceived of and brought us our very first Fourth Estate Award dinner. Thank you, Don. He's been instrumental in putting together countless Fourth Estate Award dinners since then. Thank you so much for giving us our signature event. The current National Press Club leadership is well recognized here tonight as well. Would the members of our Board of Governors and our officers please stand? And would the board members of the National Press Club Journalism Institute please rise as well? Thank you all for all that you do for the National Press Club. The National Press Club Journalism Institute is the club's 501c3 organization. It does many wonderful things, and I would like to have you become more acquainted with some of the things that we do, and here is a short film that will tell you more about it.
It is wonderful to be back here at the Press Club.
members of the National Press Club.
I'm very pleased to have the chance to be here at the National Press Club.
Thank you very much for inviting me to speak at the world-famous, highly influential National Press Club.
Excellent.
Since its founding more than a century ago, the National Press Club has been the place where news happens, the hub of American journalism, drawing global leaders, political power players, corporate executives, and cultural icons to the heart of the nation's capital. At the core of the club's mission to be the world's leading professional organization for journalists is its charitable and educational nonprofit arm, the National Press Club Journalism Institute, dedicated to promoting a free press, training working and future journalists, and honoring the highest standards of the profession.
The press calls itself the Fourth Estate, hence the award, which means that it is a fundamental pillar of our civil society. And as such, it carries a unique responsibility to seek the truth at all cost, to do our work without fear nor favor, and to really be the bulwark between the people and power.
Christiane Amanpour is the 2008 recipient of the National Press Club's highest honor, the Fourth Estate Award. For more than 3 decades, the award has recognized such legendary names in news as Walter Cronkite, Mary McRory, Tom Brokaw, Bob Schieffer, William Raspberry, and Jim Lehrer for lifetime contributions to American journalism.
And it's our job to shine the light in any corners that are dark, whether they're political corners or whether they're corners of deep social injustice.
The Abishan Press Freedom Award honors those whose actions embody the struggle to advance press freedom and open government. For 2011, the domestic winner is Lara Logan, the CBS News Chief Foreign Affairs Correspondent. In Egypt earlier this year to cover the uprising against Hosni Mubarak, she was viciously attacked in Tahrir Square on the night of February 11th.
I really wanted to say thank you to the National Press Club. You took me in your arms, thank you, and recognized what I've tried to do, and hopefully, you know, I can go far beyond Egypt and leave a greater contribution than that in the work that I do.
To ensure journalists, scholars, and the community have access to accurate, timely information, the Institute's Eric Friedheim National Journalism Library serves as the capital's premier research and training venue. Professional development classes held in the Bloomberg Center for Electronic Journalism help journalists hone their craft in a rapidly changing media world. Industry experts like Vanessa Fox, creator of Google's Webmaster Central, explain the secrets of search engines as a reporting tool and for building internet audiences. The Ethics and Excellence in Journalism Foundation signaled its support with generous funding of the Institute's year-long series, Investigative Reporting in a New Media Environment, featuring Pulitzer Prize-winning panelists. The Institute recruits promising journalists who help ensure the nation's newsrooms reflect the diversity of the communities they serve. CBS correspondent Terrell Brown is a Persina scholar.
Being a journalist is a calling. I believe it's my calling. It's what I feel I was born to do. And I couldn't have fulfilled this passion and lived this dream without the Persina Scholarship.
To support its scholarship and education programs, the Institute sponsors signature fundraisers like the Fourth Estate Dinner, attended by media luminaries from the national stage. Each November, the Institute hosts one of the capital's premier literary events, the annual Book Fair and Authors Night. Featured on C-SPAN's Book TV, the unique forum gathers world-famous authors, politicos, and pundits to the club's historic site. As part of its literacy outreach, the Book Fair partners with public charter seed schools, donating library books to help underserved and at-risk students prepare for college.
Yeah, books are very important. It helps me figure out different things about the world and subjects.
I'm planning on majoring in computer engineering and maybe philosophy. I haven't made up my mind yet.
With its popular Beat the Deadline 5K, the Journalism Institute raises critical funds for education and scholarships.
Bring it home for us.
It's a race featuring such celebrity race marshals as CNN's Suzanne Malveaux and P90X fitness trainer Tony Horton.
Come on, everybody, let's hear it.
Hang on down, watch out for people nearby.
The 5K winds through the nation's capital and attracts elite runners, weekend walkers, and teams of national journalists.
The race was fantastic.
So whether it's crossing the finish line to promote diversity in the newsroom, training the journalists of tomorrow, or fostering a free and informed press, the National Press Club Journalism Institute continues to bear the standard of journalism at home and around the world.
The National Press Club Journalism Institute is a worthy cause, and by attending tonight's dinner, you are contributing to it. The Fourth Estate Dinner serves as the Press Club Journalism Institute's premier fundraiser, and as part of it, I'm sure you noticed we're having a silent auction in the lobby. Some great items are up for bid, including 2 round-trip air tickets to Bangkok, as well as a stay at the Mandarin Oriental Bangkok, among many other great items. So please take a moment during dinner to have a walk out to the lobby and have a look and place your bids. Bid early, bid often. And I will also give you a 15-minute warning before the auction closes. So you're not going to miss anything. Enjoy your dinner, and I'll give you that warning, and you can all bolt out there to make your last bid. A special thank you goes to all of our silent auction sponsors who are listed in your program. Also tonight, we're honored to acknowledge the contributions of our very special group of sponsors. Don Graham, one of our speakers tonight, joins us as a sponsor at the gold level. Thank you very much, Don, for your gift, not only to this dinner, but to everyone who benefits from the work of the National Press Club Journalism Institute. Toyota, one of our longtime and most loyal supporters, is a sponsor of this dinner at the silver level. Many thanks to Ed Lewis of Toyota, who is a member of the Journalism Institute board and someone we can count on in a number of ways to make the club the best it can be. Thank you, Ed. The Auto Alliance also joins us at the silver level of sponsorship. This is the first time that the Auto Alliance has sponsored this event, so those of you who are here from the Auto Alliance, thank you very much for the start of what we hope will be a long and fruitful relationship. Brown Capital Management joins us as a sponsor at the silver level. Brown Capital Management also sponsored this event last year. Thank you. The American Petroleum Institute also joins us as a sponsor at the silver level. It's the first time that API has sponsored this event, and again, we are very grateful. Austin Kiplinger, a past Fourth Estate Award winner, also joins us as a sponsor at silver level. Thank you, Austin, for your sponsorship and for all that you have done for the club over the years. And finally, I'd like to thank Washington Wholesale for providing us with our fine wines this evening. In addition, Simon & Schuster deserves our thanks for the books and our gift bags tonight. And I'd like to thank CQ Roll Call for its help in promoting tonight's dinner. Thank you to all of our sponsors. You are doing your part to ensure that a vibrant free press will continue to serve the watchdog role that our founding fathers intended. And your reward for this evening is a delicious dinner brought to you by the National Press Club's executive chef, Susan Delbert. So I hope you will enjoy your evening. I will be back a bit later to get a start on our program and to also give you your 15-minute warning for the auction. See you in a few minutes. Good evening once again, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you all enjoyed your wonderful dinner. Now, though, it's time for the moment we've been waiting for, our tribute to Bob Woodward. To get our evening started, I'd like to introduce Catherine Weymouth, who is going to give us a little insight on Bob. Catherine?
Thank you. I was supposed to go after Don, but I cannot follow Don because he's too good. So they had to rearrange the program. There is one man who strikes fear in the hearts of leaders everywhere. That man is Bob Woodward. I have been privileged to know Bob from childhood. For a long time, he's been a living legend to me. Actually, for a long time, I wasn't sure whether Bob was Robert Redford or Robert Redford was Bob. Today, Bob really is a legend. He's a legend both for what he accomplished during Watergate, but also for being a prolific and penetrating writer of what my grandfather, Philip Graham, called the first draft of history. Time and again, Bob Woodward pulls together the first comprehensive look at history unfolding and how decisions are made. But back when he started, he was just a schmo like the rest of us. Rereading my grandmother's book, I was surprised to learn that Bob turned down Harvard Law School for a career in journalism. Good move. He knew what he wanted to do. He so wanted to work for the Post that one editor put Woodward on staff, unpaid, for 2 weeks to see what he could do. At the end of that tenure, as my grandmother wrote, the editor confidently declared, and I quote, that Woodward was a bright and good guy, but lacked the skills needed for being a newspaperman. In short, was hopeless and would be too much trouble to train. The editor told Woodward to go get some experience elsewhere and come back in a year. For most of us, that might have deterred us. We might have gone back to Harvard Law School. Not Bob. He knew then that he loved journalism and was going to come back. And boy, did he come back. But long after Bob became known not for Watergate, but for the piercing insights of his books, Bob remains a reporter first and foremost. He never fails to come in and report for the paper when a big story breaks and we need all hands on deck. Having helped my grandmother become the publisher that she was, and then helped Don and Bo after that, Bob has been kind enough to take me on as his most recent project. When I first took the helm, Bob invited me over to breakfast at his house. In my 40-odd years, I had never been to breakfast at Bob's house. We had a most elegant breakfast, and then Bob gave me 2 pieces of advice. I weighed his advice carefully and then promptly did the exact opposite. A year later, Bob approached me and told me that he had thought about his advice from the prior year and had decided that he was wrong and I was right to have done what I did. That is the kind of gracious man that Bob Woodward is. And as I reviewed my grandmother's book, I can say I was most relieved to see that he has never said to me what he said to my grandmother just a few years after Watergate. And this, mind you, was in the days people refer to today as the heyday of the Washington Post. He said to Kay, and I quote, "The paper is going down the shithole." So far, he hasn't said that to me or Marcus, and I'm very grateful. What has amazed me most about Bob is his almost unparalleled work ethic. I started my career as a summer intern at the law firm Williams & Connolly, the firm led by the inimitable Brendan Sullivan, the man who famously informed the Congressional Committee investigating Oliver North that he was not a potted plant. As summer interns, our only real exposure to Brendan was a lunch when he talked about the work the firm did and the kind of lawyers they were looking for. One very brave or very stupid intern had the temerity to raise his hand and ask Brendan what he thought about work-life balance. Brendan looked at this kid as if he had just landed from another planet. He paused and then said, "Every morning I wake at 5:30 and I think to myself, now is the time mine enemy is asleep." I think the blood in our little intern veins froze. It turns out, though, that Bob and Brendan have a lot in common. Just the other night, I was privileged to be at a dinner with Bob. He said this, every morning I wake and I think to myself, what are the bastards trying to hide today? True. Most people who hit the pinnacle of their career in their 20s only go downhill from there. While Watergate may have put Woodward on the map, he was not going to let it define him. It was only his first great work. Bob has dedicated his life to explaining and exposing to the American people the inner workings of the people and institutions who hold the power. He even has a reputation with the staff at the White House. Bob was telling me recently that as he was waiting in the White House for one of his interviews recently for the Obama book, a West Wing assistant said to him, "You again? You are here more than anyone else." What really amazes me is that people still talk to Bob, but I've figured it out. Despite all that he has written, Bob has that sweet, almost southern, gentle manner and soft speech that lets you believe that you can get him to see things your way. But his most brilliant quality is his ability to listen and use the intensive research he has done to get more out of the story. Bob himself has become such a legend that people want him to record their story because they know that while they may not like it, his reporting will always be full and fair. So I'd like to propose a toast to the legendary Bob Woodward and the great investigative reporting that he has come to personify, to his unfailing dedication to the Washington Post and our commitment to excellence in journalism, and to many more happy years of working together side by side.
Thank you, Catherine, for that insight onto Bob. George Solomon worked in the Post sports department for years while Bob worked on his investigation. So perhaps George can tell us a little more fun stories about Bob as well. George?
Thank you very much. We were colleagues since 1972 when I joined the Post. And you didn't mention this, but Bob was also the assistant managing editor for Metropolitan News, in addition to being a great investigative reporter. And I started my career as well as a reporter and didn't have quite the success Bob has had. And, but I did have enough to say if I'm going to talk about Woodward, the man, the myth, I better do some reporting. And the first person I called was Carl Bernstein. And I called him 2 days ago and said, all right, here's a deadline. You have to call me at 6 p.m. And he called me tonight at 6:30. It's the truth, and you know it. And he gave me an anecdote, which I simply cannot use in front of a family audience. So you know about that, too. Then I called Mike Gettler, who was the assistant managing editor for Foreign, National, deputy managing editor, and now he's the ombudsman for the public broadcasting. And here's what Gettler said about Woodward. He's like me. There's nothing funny about him. Elsa might agree. Leonard Downey, who worked with Woodward for years and years and years, mostly as his boss, said Bob has an ingratiating way of getting what he wants. And I said, well, what do you mean? Well, he would come into Len's office and start the conversation this way. Len, you're a great editor. And then he got what he wanted. Bob Kaiser, the managing editor for many years at the Post, he said this, Bob fully exploited being Bob Woodward. When Bob Woodward calls and says you need to call him back, you call him back. Wait a minute. Peter Osnos, who's now the president of Public Affairs Publishing, he gave me this enlightened quote. He said, Bob, when Alsnos left the Post to take this lofty position with a publishing company, Bob told him what to think about and what to do as a publisher, and Bob said this, you can fake a friendship, and then he said you can fake something else, and I'm not going to repeat that, but you can't fake a book. And to this day, I don't know what he meant on that. Bob does have endearing qualities. One time when we were in San Juan at a senior editor's retreat, Ben Bradley would call pugwash, which is the reason, Marcus, you don't have any money now, because we spent it all then. I played golf with Bob, and to say he was prepared is an understatement. On the third hole, he hit his drive through the window of a neighboring house. And to show how prepared he was, Woodward took out his checkbook and wrote the person a $250 check for the broken window. Another person told me, and this is an interesting way of looking at Bob, that he would play golf at Rock Creek Park before the sun came up and before the starter or cashier ever showed up. So he played 5 years without paying, I'm told, which is the reason for the city's desperate plight. But then there was, when Woodward hit it big, and he did, in the late 70s, early 80s, I don't know how this happened, he bought a sailboat. Modest, it was as big as the QE2. And this sailboat was huge. And Woodward felt that the assistant managing editors were not getting along with each other. We did, we hated each other. He was right about that. And, but he said, well, we ought to go out and bond. And he convinced the editor, Ben Bradley, and Howard Simons this was a really, really good idea. So we show up at I guess it was in the Chesapeake or whatever, place Woodward docked this huge sailboat. And we showed up, and we go out, and, and we're going to have a great time. And all of a sudden, there's no wind. There's a lot of hot air. That's my best line, so if you would, okay, you're not going to get better than that. But there's no wind. And we're stuck out in the Chesapeake, and I'm in a bad position because for the quarter, I'm $150,000 over budget, and I just got beat by the Washington Star on a story, and Ben Bradley and Howard Simons are getting bored, and they're starting to look at me. So talk about being in a bad position. There you go. One time, Bob said, we have to have lunch. Now, he doesn't do that often. He just doesn't come out, Catherine, and say, let's have lunch. So he said, let's have lunch. And I go, what does he want to have lunch with me about? He gets on the front page. Sports doesn't get on the front page. We did have a thing where John Feinstein would work with me for 5 months, and I'd get sick of him and con him off to Woodward. And then Woodward would have him for 5 months, and he'd get sick of him, and he'd pawn him off on me. So that was the way that worked, and Feinstein proceeded to write 29 books and become richer than Woodward. So to show he's smarter than both of us. So I figure, well, what does he want to have lunch? So he takes me to lunch, and he says, well, this is between us. I've been told you're not going to succeed Ben Bradley. Well, that's like him telling me you're not going to start Sunday as a tight end for the Redskins. I mean, come on. So, with that, he's been a great colleague, a great friend, and I'll tell you this, no one has ever done it better in our business beside Ben Bradley and Bob Woodward. Thank you.
Thank you, George. Now we turn to a writer who's known for his lucid, detailed profiles of leaders from politics to sports. We look forward to his insights now on a great leader in journalism. David?
It's great to follow Henny Youngman. Shecky Green, okay. But actually, I'm really delighted to be here because it gives me an opportunity to say some things in public about Bob and Elsa that I've thought for a long time. I actually wrote out my speech, and it's called The Perfect Shot. A summer day many years ago, Bob Woodward and I were trudging our way up and down Rock Creek Golf Course, the People's Course. And in fact, George, he didn't play for free. They'd never cashed a $100 bill until Bob got there.
Did you see it?
It's framed in the pro shop. On the 6th hole, a rolling par 4, Bob was about 120 yards from the green, as I remember it. I don't recall what club he pulled from his bag. It might have been an 8-iron. If I were as meticulous as Bob about recording every material fact of life, I might have the precise date and time and distance stored away in a filing cabinet in my home office, along with a scorecard. But I'm not, and I don't. What I do have etched permanently in my mind's eye is what happened next. Bob hit his second shot on a precise arc toward the green, the raised green, and we watched two wonder-struck hackers as the ball disappeared at the pin. No bounce, on a fly, it landed smack inside the hole. It did not come out. For the rest of the round, Bob set about trying to calculate the odds of what he had just done, using some creative Woodwardian geometry based on the square footage between his ball's departure and arrival places. An overwhelming improbability, unforgettable, one perfect shot. One spring night in 1979, Bob drove out to Annapolis from Washington to have dinner with Mike Weiskopf and me, the two Maryland State House reporters for the Post, who had become part of his new domain as the Metro editor-to-be for the newspaper. This was 7 years after Watergate. He was already the most famous newspaper man in the country. I'd never met him before, but I was intimately familiar with his stories. I'd worked at a radio station in Madison, Wisconsin during 1972 and 1973, and whenever a piece moved over the wire from Woodward and Bernstein, the Capital Times, the progressive paper in Madison where my dad was the editor, would strip it across the top of the front page. And I at the radio station would then take that story and rewrite it in its entirety for my 15-minute radio newscast. This was the first time, but not the last, as it would turn out, that I might rewrite Woodward. But what I remember most about that first encounter with the real Bob Woodward in Annapolis was the enthusiasm and sense of camaraderie that he brought with him. He had already reached the unparalleled heights of his profession, yet he seemed only interested in finding out who we were and what stories we were going after. There was no sense that schlepping out to Annapolis to talk about the doings of the Maryland House Economic Matters Committee was beneath him, just the opposite. He was immediately into it, curious, wanting to know everything that we knew. That night was the beginning of a 33-year friendship and partnership that I cherish. Bob has been like a big brother to me all of that time, looking out for me, offering advice on life and work, showering my family with his boundless generosity, reading my manuscripts, paving the way for me in the world of writing books, and teaching me how to be an associate editor at the Post, which mostly means you don't have to associate with editors. Some people who accomplish great things also happen to be jerks. Sometimes the very characteristics that push them to achieve are the ones that make them unpleasant. The honor Bob is receiving tonight, in a sense, has nothing to do with his personal qualities. It's about his history-making brilliance as a journalist, plain and simple. Like the Hall of Fame in Cooperstown, being a good person can't get you in. Hitting or pitching a baseball better than anyone else is what counts. But I would not be here if I didn't admire Bob as a human being as much as I do. Some of that is evident in his body of work. How many people could go through a once-in-a-lifetime experience at the early age of 29, become an icon, part of modern American mythology, world famous, and not be at once inflated and diminished by the experience? Bob, in partnership with Carl Bernstein, carried out a sustained act of investigative journalism that may never be matched. Yet what I've always found most astounding about him is, as Catherine said, not what he did, but what he continued to do day after day, month after month, year after year, now for 40 more years after he burst into the national consciousness with Watergate. No big-headedness, no basking in faded glory, no posturing and peacocking, not even lollygagging. He just kept going, kept working, and kept his cool head through it all. I like to think that that's the Midwesterner in him, since he's from Wheaton, Illinois, and I'm from Madison, Wisconsin. A regional bias, but it might be partly so. He is, in any case, in the Marinus Hall of Fame for an act of kindness that my family will never forget. On the very day one of his books came out and he was in the middle of interviews, he knew that I was stuck out of town and my wife was recovering from a serious operation, and he slipped over to our house and brought her a dinner of lamb chops. Lamb chops. For some reason, that's what touched me the most. Any journalist who was in Bob's orbit during those past 40 years could not help but learn invaluable lessons from him. I was lucky enough to be in that orbit. Whenever I'm worried about whether I have the real story, I hear Bob's voice in my subconscious. His earnest, reverberating baritone is easily mimicked, but I'm not an impersonator, so I'll leave that to others. But he'd say, "You've got to find the documents. Go back again for another interview. The first interview is almost worthless. The second is a little better. The third and fourth can be gold. The more you know, the more people will tell you." That's the Woodward mantra, and it should be engraved on the wall of every newsroom. Get the documents. The evidence is out there. The truth can be found, not on the surface, but deeper. It can be found if you keep going after it. Bob and I are different, very different in many ways. We look at the world differently, people differently, stories differently, but what we share is far more important. And that has to do with the value of deep reporting and what it takes to do it right. In one sense, our profession has changed forever. Blogs, Twitter, Tumblr, Facebook, Instagram, so much of it has to do with speed and attitude. There's no use lamenting these changes. They're inevitable, unstoppable. But it's more important than ever to stand up for the values that Bob Woodward, more than any reporter of the post-war generation, symbolized and practices at the highest level. Anyone can blab, anyone can blog, anyone can have an opinion, but for any of that to have any meaning, someone has to go out there and try to find out what really happened. Not the press conference, not the press release, not the talking points, not the deadening rhetoric of the modern political culture, not the conventional wisdom, not the Googled material, not the ideological agenda, but the real story. Get the documents, talk to people, go back again and again and again in search of truth. I've spent most of my career trying to figure out why people are the way they are, the forces that shape them. Of the many stories that Bob has told about his own life, the one that explains him best, captures his journalistic personality, is when he was a teenager in Wheaton, Illinois, and found himself alone in the office of his father, a lawyer, and surreptitiously rummaged through some of the case files, divorce files, where he discovered one Cheever-like story after another about the dysfunction and pathos and deception that lay beneath the gloss of what seemed like perfect suburban existences. His natural curiosity was infused with a skepticism by that. Things are rarely as they appear to be. But what's remarkable to me is that skepticism never devolved into outright cynicism. He was never an innocent, but he refused to succumb to the darkness. Like most cultural icons, my friend Bob Woodward is shrouded in mythology, open to misinterpretation and caricature. Some people make him out to be more than he is, some less. But he, more than anyone, would want to be seen as he really is, and that's more than enough. He became known to all of us because of that time long ago when for 2 years, in story after story, he hit the journalist equivalent of that perfect shot right in the cup. It happened. It's a great story. It's a great part of history. That alone would be enough to earn him his Fourth Estate Award. But his meaning, the way I look at it, has very little to do with perfection or timing or luck. It has to do with boundless curiosity and effort. The late David Halberstam, in his final book about the Korean War, tells the story of being down in North Carolina doing research, and he's bone tired, and the weather's terrible, and he wants to catch an early flight home, but he decides to go out for one final interview and drives through a storm to find an old Korean vet. And that interview makes all the difference, unfolds a story he wouldn't have found had he not kept going. That, to me, is the essence of Bob Woodward, his trademark. He gets up every day and just keeps going after another document, another interview, another story. He's still that teenager going through those filing cabinets in his dad's law office, curious, aware, looking for something more, not the gloss. Perhaps this award is 40 years overdue, but it means more now, representing the totality of that effort of Bob Woodward. Even if he is, like me, a pretty lousy golfer, despite that one unforgettable shot, he's the best reporter in the world.
Thank you, David. I think there's no better person to conclude our talk about Bob than Don Graham, who joined the Post as a reporter about the same time as Bob did. Don?
Thank you so much, Teresa, and thank you to the Press Club for hosting all of us. You came to learn about Bob Woodward. You've learned a little about Catherine, about George, and I want to say a word about Marinus, who's one of Bob's oldest friends and closest buddies. They were each other's editors over the years. They were 1-2 on an investigative staff that would not quit. And as you have just seen, David in his own way is as special as Bob is. And as David said, they are different. But if you have not read and enjoyed David's amazing book on the president, Barack Obama, the story, it is another in an amazing career of David Marinus books, but I could not recommend it to you more highly. I want to mold my remarks about Bob around what David has said. First of all, there are a room full of present and former Washington Post people here. I can't introduce them all. I want you to meet 4 because I know that this room is full of fans of great journalism. And I want to introduce Marcus Brauchley, the editor of the Washington Post, Len Downey, his predecessor and Bob's and my colleague, who goes so far back that he was Bob's editor on many of the Watergate stories, and Dana Priest and Ann Hull, who are collectively the 2 reporters who broke the Walter Reed story some years ago, but have each gone on and won other Pulitzer Prizes for other work since. And would the 4 of you stand? Yeah. So Woodward has been at the Post 41 years, and by God, I've been there before he was. I came to the Post in 1971 as a reporter, and it's a source of considerable irritation to me that even though I've run off all the other reporters who came in 1971, I'm still not the best reporter who came to the Post in 1971, and I never will be. But if you want to know why the Washington Post is such a lucky place, listen to the words that Catherine and George and David spoke about Bob, and look in your program. There's a list of previous winners of the Fourth Estate Award, and those who spent a career with us, some spent a shorter time, but Herb Block, Shirley Povich, whose legacy George perpetuates, David Broder, Mary McGrory, Bill Raspberry, among others. Now, there's so many folks here who've been connected with the Post for a long time. We would all tell you that those were great journalists, honored for greatness, but they were also great people. What a lucky place where, as David says, the people we all wanted to emulate, the people we all loved and admired, were also the people who were kind to colleagues, as David described. And it wasn't just him and Weisskopf, both of whom went on to be pretty big names in the business. It was the summer interns, it was the beginning reporters who worshiped Woodward, who had come into the business because of him and Carl, and who learned from him. Just think about this about yourself. Suppose, as David said, when you're in your very early 30s, you've not only broken the Watergate story, you've not only done work that's led to the only resignation of a president in American history, you've not only won a Pulitzer Prize, you've not only written the #1 best-selling book in the United States, sold it to the movies, been played by Redford. What would you do with the rest of your life? Honestly, 99% of people would kick back. They would say, I'm going to enjoy myself more, whatever enjoyment constitutes. Bob went to work harder. He never, ever, ever let up. It was his work habits. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, go back and reread all the President's Men. It was his work habits that broke the Watergate story. It was reporting at night. It was knocking on the doors of people who could not talk to him in the office, but opened the door and told him and Carl the story. The great Edward Bennett Williams once said to me, what nobody in Washington has, what everyone craves, is longevity. And Woodward, a newspaper reporter, achieved that. He has done legendary reporting all his life for the Post, but he's now also written and published his 17th book. 12 of his previous books have become #1 bestsellers. And I don't know that any writer, since they started keeping bestseller lists, has written that many #1 best-selling books. But the measure of a reporter's life is not how many prizes has he won, or how much money has he made, or how famous is he. The measure of a reporter's life is how much have we learned from him? What has he told us that we didn't know before? This room is full of great reporters. It's the National Press Club. I see out here Simeon Booker, another former winner of this award, who also passed through the Washington Post on the way to what Teresa called a legendary career, and that is so. But the answer with great reporters is, and the answer with Woodward is, we have learned enormously. Yes, at the time of Watergate, but over and over and over again since. The stunning details in the final days, the closest ever examination of the Supreme Court and the Brethren, the first look from inside at the Fed in his book about Greenspan, his book about war and why we go to war called The Commanders. But I would single out the 4 books that Bob wrote about Presidents Bush and Obama and the wars that we fought and continue to fight in Iraq and Afghanistan. Within a year of the time the first American soldiers deployed to Afghanistan, Bob had published a book with the National Security Council minutes, with the discussions that had taken place in that council. What did the Secretary of Defense want to do? What did the head of the CIA want to do? What did the president want to do? It is all there. It read one way in 2002, and it reads a very different way in 2012. And Bob didn't stop. He went back with a book immediately after President Bush chose to begin the war in Afghanistan, another 2-3 years later when that conflict was at its nadir, and another after the first year of the Obama administration. That book, Obama's Wars, has to be read in tandem with his new book, The Price of Politics, as the most complete portrait of the Obama administration anyone has yet published or will for a long time. How does the president run a meeting? Whose advice does he seek? How does he make up his mind? And Obama's Wars concludes with a 6-page, single-spaced, tight memorandum governing the United States and Afghanistan that President Obama wrote, but that no one had ever laid eyes on until Bob got a hold of it and published it. There is nothing in American history that compares to what Bob did in those 4 books. We've fought many wars from the Revolution to Vietnam, and in no case, and it would have been damn important in Vietnam, did we know what was on the minds of our leaders. But we can know that about the war now going on by reading Bob. In a sense, I mean this as a compliment. Bob is an old-fashioned man. He is old-fashioned with respect to our business, just as Dave Marinas said. And as well-known as he is, and I hope as wealthy as he is after all those #1 books, he would be far more wealthier and far more famous had he sought it. All he wanted to do was report, because he believed in the importance of reporting. And ladies and gentlemen, I know you do too. I know that is what built the institutions, what built the National Press Club, what built every one of its journalist members. And whatever changes in our profession, that will not change. News organizations are built on reporting. And this man never compromised his values, never sensationalized, never wanted to get his picture on TV except when he learned something that people needed to know. He won't do it. He has the honest belief that telling people more of the truth is the best thing of all. Thank goodness for Bob Woodward. Tonight, we honor someone who deserves it for what he's done and for the way he's lived his life.
Thank you, Don. You've left me with a very tough act to follow. Actually, that's just what Bob has left all of us. I think it's safe to say there will never, ever be another Bob Woodward. Bob Woodward, with Carl Bernstein, broke the story that saved the country from a corrupt presidency. And that's not all. Over a career spanning more than 40 years, he has thrown open the closed doors of the Supreme Court, the Federal Reserve, and the CIA. He's chronicled presidents as they work their way through wars and economic crises. And he's kept telling important stories the nation needs to know in the Washington Post, including the Post Pulitzer Prize for its coverage of the September 11th terrorist attacks. Tonight, we are honoring Bob Woodward, but he has really been a part of this dinner for 39 years. That is when the National Press Club held its first Fourth Estate Award dinner, and much of Washington's media elite had gathered in this ballroom to honor Walter Cronkite, the legendary CBS anchorman. But suddenly, during the dinner, guests started fleeting, and it was all because of Woodward and Bernstein. In the middle of the dinner, word broke out about the Saturday Night Massacre. President Nixon had fired the Watergate special prosecutor, and the Attorney General and the Deputy Attorney General resigned in protest. It was a huge story, and reporters who thought they would spend the evening honoring Cronkite instead returned to their typewriters. We at the National Press Club Never mind having our events upstaged by breaking news. After all, that is what we are all about. In all seriousness, though, Bob, I stand here tonight to thank you. Thank you on behalf of the generation of journalists who have been inspired by your work. America understands its government far better because of Bob Woodward. From one administration to the next, he delves deep and tells the inside story of how leaders lead and how they fail. He leaves his readers with life lessons and warnings that can guide them when they enter the voting booth. No journalist has ever been so essential. And for that reason, the award we present to you tonight could not be any more well-deserved. Bob, it is my deepest honor and pleasure to present you with the National Press Club's 40th Fourth Estate Award for Career Achievement. I think we have to step over here to do a photo op here.
Thank you very much. I would like to introduce another former Washington Post reporter, my wife, Elsa Walsh. Will you please stand up? This is a great and wise lady. And when we talked about what I should talk about tonight, she essentially said, well, you know, why don't you discuss all the stupid things you've done? And we decided that that would take all night. So I just want to pick one. This was the late 1970s, and I was working on a story about a Saudi arms dealer named Adnan Khashoggi. Some of you remember him. And I wanted to interview him and sent letters, intermediaries, phone messages, absolutely radio silence, nothing. And one day in my office at the Post, the phone rang and said, gentleman with a nice Middle Eastern accent said, Mr. Woodward? I said, yes, I am Adnan Khashoggi's executive assistant. And I would like to come have lunch with you, and we will talk about you talking to Mr. Khashoggi. And I'm going to be in Washington in 2.5 weeks, and so I go ahead to my calendar, and we'll have lunch. And I said, and you are? And he said, my name is Avril Foolsday. Yeah. You should have been there to help me. And of course, it turned out that the lunch was on April 1st. So I put on my best suit and went to the outrage room at the Madison and waited at the table. Mr. Foolsday stood me up. Don't laugh so hard, Graham.
What's the bill?
Please. So I ate alone. Elsa and I have a daughter, and this was about 7 or 8 years ago I think she was about 6 or 7. She said, hey, I understand you had a source named Deep Throat. I said, yes. And that is a movie. I said, yes. And it's about oral sex. I said, yes. And she said, what's oral sex? And I knew I could answer her honestly, because I said, I don't remember. And I passed the buck by saying, ask your mother. It was about 7 years ago. Elsa and I were in Colorado at one of these conferences and wound up at a dinner where I was seated next to Al Gore, the former vice president. Now, sitting next to Al Gore at dinner, let's be honest, it's unpleasant. And if you know anything about Gore's biography, before he went into politics, he was a journalist and practiced journalism. And it turns out he thinks he invented that also. So we're sitting there, and I had written 2 of the 4 Bush books, and he started grinding on me about the books. Said, you know, why don't you come out against Bush in the Iraq War? And I said, look, I'm just trying to find out what happened. He said, oh, horse shit. Actually, it was more than that. And he said, I remember the Watergate stories. You and Carl Bernstein wrote those. You came out against Nixon and the crimes of Watergate. And I said, no, actually, those were, we tried to stick to the facts. And he said, look, Buster, I read those stories. I said, I wrote those stories. Not necessarily a man of self-doubt. Didn't move the needle for Gore at all. He had read them. And anyway, we got to a much more interesting subject, which was at the core of journalism. How much do we know about what really goes on? And something we report, you know, it's true. You get up in the morning and you wonder what you don't know and what's being hidden. And so I just asked, said, you were there for 8 years in the Clinton presidency, in the West Wing, and now it's 5 years after. There have been endless coverage, the Whitewater scandal, the Lewinsky scandal, all kinds of books. I'd written some of them. Marinus had, you know, all kinds of people had written about it. So what percentage of what is significant or interesting do we now know? And he said, 1%. Well, of course, I died, and I have to confess to having an unclean thought. Because when he said 1%, I immediately thought, is it possible there are that many women we don't know about? Could be a big number. And then I just asked, well, suppose you wrote a tell-all memoir, and in he got on his high horse. I'd never write a tell-all memoir. Suppose you did. Then how much would we know about what went on that's interesting or of consequence? And he said, 2%. Now, that's just Gore being Gore, but the interesting thing, what you have to do is develop a method, have the luxury and the patience, which I thank the Washington Post for, to really try to dig into things, and you need to be at the right place at the right time. And Jerome, are we ready? Okay. Here, oh, good, you did this is the first time I've used slides. Now, this is a picture well known. Nixon leaving the White House in August 1974. And you've probably seen it in a magazine or newspapers and so forth. Pardon? It's in our hallway. It's in your hallway. Okay, now I want to just show you the same picture from a different angle. Oh, didn't work. It makes a difference to be on the helicopter and when you're working on that story. then actually these pictures are really from Elsa's home photo album. There's this one, the Supreme Court. There's this one, I did a book on John Belushi. You know, this was a clumsy attempt by me to be hip. Clearly didn't work. You have to look a little closely here at a Clinton cabinet meeting. I'm sitting in the back. They used to have lunch together alone. Then we go to Bush. Wanted to get to know him. Now, the real challenge was the Obama administration. Message control, very difficult to get through, and so forth. And so here's the president looking, he'd heard something, and this is what and the only way when you're caught like that is to smile and apologize. And then here's Biden on the phone. Here is sometimes you have to do things that you normally don't do, like walk the dog. Now, this is a picture you've seen many, many times, right? The whole national security team and the president watching the Osama bin Laden raid. Now, what they did is they airbrushed this picture. And that's not the real one. Here's the real one. Now, sometimes you get, you know, there are tense moments in the White House, and people are distracted, and the president will let you sit in his lap. As you see, in this case, that's what happened. Now, this is a well-known photo. It's in my new book. The president and Speaker Boehner meeting on the patio outside the Oval Office, excuse me, on a summer day. And they have both talked, when I interviewed them for this book, they talked about this meeting, and they were doing, drinking and consuming different things. And so you see, I got some Merlot and Camels for the speaker and for the president, iced tea and Nicorettes. And then this was my reward. Okay, now, I want to tell one other story quickly, and that is, it was when Hillary Clinton was senator from New York, and she was giving a speech one night, and I was giving a speech to the same group, and afterwards we stopped to talk. And she said that she had quoted all the time from my book, Plan of Attack, which is the second Bush book about how we decided to go to war in Iraq. And I said, oh, well, what do you quote? And she said, oh, the last line in the book. Bush asked, how do you think history will view your Iraq war? And Bush stood in the Oval Office, threw his hands in the air, and said, history, we won't know, we'll all be dead. Comforting thought. Good way to end the book. I said, well, now why do you quote that all the time? And she said, you can't be president of the United States and talk like that. And I said, well, now wait a minute, why? And she said, look, Bush is a fatalist, somebody who does his job, but really turns it over to other people and turns history over to other people. And I remember thinking, if she ever became president and somebody went and asked her, how do you think history would judge your decision on something, she would answer, I'll write it. I said, so, why, Bush, and she really she started getting kind of slapping her fist in her hand, kind of that lamp-throwing anger. I stepped back a little bit, and she said, George Bush is a fatalist. And I pushed back a little bit and said, Lincoln was a fatalist. She said, no, you cannot talk like that and be President of the United States. And pushed back a little bit more and said, look, George Washington would never talk like that. Thomas Jefferson would never talk like that. Bill would never talk like that. And so I thought, oh, the new Mount Rushmore. Washington, Jefferson, and Bill. And I was going to say something. And then I imagined ahead to the history we don't know and the future we don't know. Washington, Jefferson, Clinton, and Clinton. And I was going to say something to her when she talked about Bill and so forth. And then I thought, which this is the dilemma we live in as reporters, and this is where George W. Bush had it right. We don't know. We'll all be dead. You saw it here first. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bob. I'm not quite sure what to say.
Wait a minute.
Come back.
My lawyer said, make sure that those pictures do not get on the internet. And so will everyone agree that it's off the record?
I think it's too
Right?
late.
What?
I think it's too late.
You think it's too late? Oh, okay.
I was
Okay.
Facebooking
Because I remember Don's mother, Catherine's grandmother, when I'd worked for the Post for, I guess, about a year, you would she would have these breakfast, dinners, receptions at her house. And the rule for a reporter was it's totally and absolutely off the record. And I believed that for about 6 months. And then one morning, Catherine Graham herself called me up and said, the Secretary of Defense was here for dinner last night, and he had the most interesting things to say. Oh, wait a minute, and let me go get my notes that I wrote down. And as you know, she was a great note taker, and so she read out what the Secretary of Defense had, and clearly it was off the record, but that didn't mean that you couldn't ask others and check it out. So we got a bunch of good stories, and I used to joke with her that we had the Graham modification of off the record, which was you absolutely and totally can't use it unless it's really good.
I think maybe 47% of the people here will agree it's off the record. Bob, I have to say, being president of the National Press Club has been one of the great pleasures of my life, and this evening has definitely been a highlight of my presidency. Thank you, Bob. And the highlights are not over yet. One of the great advantages of winning the Fourth Estate Award is that it grants you lifetime membership to this fabulous club, the National Press Club. So, Bob, I'm happy to present you with your membership card. So welcome to the National Press Club, and congratulations again. I'm sure you will all be happy to hear that we will end this evening with cordials in the Holloman Lounge, but before that, I need to say a few final words. First of all, please take a look at your program. There you will see copies of Bob's reporter notebooks from the night of Watergate break-in in 1972. So if you knew they would show up 40 years later, would you have been a little neater? The keeper of those notebooks, the Ransom Center at the University of Texas in Austin, allowed us to reproduce those notebook pages for use in tonight's program, so the Ransom Center deserves our thanks for making tonight just a little more special. Also, I'd like to offer thanks to many people, starting with all of you who attended tonight. Your attendance will help ensure that the National Press Club Institute, its scholarships, and the Eric Friedheim National Journalism Library will remain a vital part to journalism in Washington and around the world. This evening's event would not be possible without the hard work of some very special people. In particular, I would like to thank the NPC and the Institute staff. The National Press Club's executive director, Bill McCarran, has made this event a priority since he joined the club 4 years ago. And Julie Shu and Melinda Cook deserve our thanks for all they did in putting together this evening. Thank you. Tonight's lovely centerpieces will be donated to the Fisher House at Walter Reed and Bethesda Hospital. The Fisher House program is a unique public-private partnership that supports America's military, enabling family members to be close to the loved ones at a most stressful time during hospitalization. And let's have a round of applause for our executive chef, Susan Delbert, who provided us with our great meal for the evening. I would also like to thank Jerry Zermensky and Donna Leinwan-Leger for the Fourth Estate Dinner Committee for all of its hard work planning this event, and the Fourth Estate Award Committee for your suggestion of Bob as our award winner this year. And finally, I would like to thank all of our members who attended tonight's dinner. You are the club. You are what make this a special place, and I'm so happy to see so many members here tonight. It's been a great evening, and I hope that you will all join us next door in the Holloman Lounge for a nightcap. Thank you all, and good night.
Thank you, Teresa. Pleasure.
Maybe we'll cross paths at a game.
I sure hope so.
Next, we have Catherine Weymouth, the publisher of the Washington Post, and Rick Dunham of Hearst Newspapers and president of the National Press Club Journalism Institute. Thank you all very much for joining us here this evening. We are also honored tonight to be joined by past winners of our Fourth Estate Award, including Austin Kiplinger, editor emeritus of the Kiplinger Organization. Austin, please stand. And legendary civil rights reporter Simeon Booker. I'm also pleased to welcome several other important guests. First off, we have several former presidents of the National Press Club and the Washington Press Club. Would all of you please stand for a moment? Thank you. And actually, I'd like to single out one of those past presidents for a special mention. 39 years ago, our president at the time, Don Larrabee. Don, would you please stand for a second? He conceived of and brought us our very first Fourth Estate Award dinner. Thank you, Don. He's been instrumental in putting together countless Fourth Estate Award dinners since then. Thank you so much for giving us our signature event. The current National Press Club leadership is well recognized here tonight as well. Would the members of our Board of Governors and our officers please stand? My name is Teresa Warner, and this year I have the honor of serving as president of the National Press Club. It's my great pleasure to welcome you here tonight for our annual Fourth Estate Award Dinner. The National Press Club is the world's leading professional organization for journalists. And tonight is one of the club's greatest nights. Each year, the club honors an outstanding journalist with its highest honor, the Fourth Estate Award. No journalist in the world deserves this award more than the man seated here to my left, Bob Woodward of the Washington Post. Perhaps Bob Schieffer of CBS News, our 2010 Fourth Estate Award winner, described Bob better than anyone. Woodward has established himself as the best reporter of our time, Schieffer once said. He may be the best reporter of all time. So it's a big challenge we have here tonight, honoring and toasting the best of the best. But I think we're well prepared to do just that, thanks to some of the people joining me here at the head table. And I would like to introduce our head table guests, starting from my left and from your right. David Maraniss, a Pulitzer Prize-winning associate editor at the Washington Post. George Solomon, a former sports editor at the Post and director of the Shirley Povich Center for Sports Journalism at the University of Maryland. Donna Leinwan-Leger of USA Today, a past National Press Club president and the vice chair of the committee that put together tonight's dinner. Our guest of honor, Bob Woodward. On the other side of the podium, we have Don Graham, CEO and chairman of the Washington Post Company. And would the board members of the National Press Club Journalism Institute please rise as well? Thank you all for all that you do for the National Press Club. The National Press Club Journalism Institute is the club's 501c3 organization. It does many wonderful things, and I would like to have you become more acquainted with some of the things that we do, and here is a short film that will tell you more about it.
It is wonderful to be back here at the Press Club.
Members of the National Press Club.
I'm very pleased to have the chance to be here at the National Press Club.
Thank you very much for inviting me to speak at the world-famous, highly influential National Press Club.
Excellent.
Since its founding more than a century ago, the National Press Club has been the place where news happens, the hub of American journalism, drawing global leaders, political power players, corporate executives, and cultural icons to the heart of the nation's capital. At the core of the club's mission to be the world's leading professional organization for journalists is its charitable and educational nonprofit arm, the National Press Club Journalism Institute, dedicated to promoting a free press, training working and future journalists, and honoring the highest standards of the profession.
The press calls itself the Fourth Estate, hence the award, which means that it is a fundamental pillar.
Tessa Fox, creator of Google's Webmaster Central, explained the secrets of search engines as a reporting tool and for building internet audiences. The Ethics and Excellence in Journalism Foundation signaled its support with generous funding of the Institute's year-long series, Investigative Reporting in a New Media Environment, featuring Pulitzer Prize-winning panelists. The Institute recruits promising journalists who help ensure the nation's newsrooms reflect the diversity of the communities they serve. CBS correspondent Terrell Brown is a Persina scholar.
Being a journalist is a calling. I believe it's my calling. It's what I feel I was born to do. And I couldn't have fulfilled this passion and lived this dream without the Persina Scholarship.
To support its scholarship and education programs, the Institute sponsors signature fundraisers like the Fourth Estate Dinner, attended by media luminaries from the national stage. Each November, the Institute hosts one of the capital's premier literary events, the annual Book Fair and Authors Night. Featured on C-SPAN's Book TV, the unique forum gathers world-famous authors, politicos, and pundits to the club's historic site. As part of its literacy outreach, the book fair partners with public charter seed schools, donating library books to help underserved and at-risk students prepare for college.
Yeah, books are very important. It helps me figure out different things about the world and subjects.
I'm planning on majoring in computer engineering and maybe philosophy. I haven't made up my mind yet.
With its popular Beat the Deadline 5K, the Journalism Institute raises critical funds for education and scholarships.
Bring it home for us.
It's a race featuring such celebrity race marshals
of our civil society. And as such, it carries a unique responsibility to seek the truth at all cost, to do our work without fear nor favor, and to really be the bulwark between the people and power.
Christiane Amanpour is the 2008 recipient of the National Press Club's highest honor, the Fourth Estate Award. For more than 3 decades, the award has recognized such legendary names in news as Walter Cronkite, Mary McRory, Tom Brokaw, Bob Schieffer, William Raspberry, and Jim Lehrer for lifetime contributions to American journalism.
And it's our job to shine the light in any corners that are dark, whether they're political corners or whether they're corners of deep social injustice.
The Abishan Press Freedom Award honors those whose actions embody the struggle to advance press freedom and open government. For 2011, the domestic winner is Lara Logan, the CBS News Chief Foreign Affairs Correspondent. In Egypt earlier this year to cover the uprising against Hosni Mubarak, she was viciously attacked in Tahrir Square on the night of February 11th.
I really wanted to say thank you to the National Press Club. You took me in your arms, thank you, and recognized what I've tried to do, and hopefully, you know, I can go far beyond Egypt and leave a greater contribution than that in the work that I do.
To ensure journalists, scholars, and the community have access to accurate, timely information, the Institute's Eric Friedheim National Journalism Library serves as the capital's premier research and training venue. Professional development classes held in the Bloomberg Center for Electronic Journalism help journalists hone their craft in a rapidly changing media world. Industry experts like